To Ukraine now, where at least 43 people, including children, have been injured in Russian shelling of a residential area in the eastern part of the country. The attack occurred about 100 kilometers from the front line and not far from the Russian border in the north. It is the latest strike by Russia on civilian targets.
In the early afternoon, Russian missiles hit this neighborhood in Pervomaisky in northeast Ukraine. The shelling damaged at least 8 buildings.
As a consequence, more than half of the neighborhood is not fit for habitation anymore. Many people were injured by shrapnel, some seriously, but there are no casualties.
Some elderly residents were among the injured.
Well, I was lying on the couch when it hit. My balcony was blown off. Everything was torn. The door was knocked out. I stutter because I'm scared and I was hurt a little.
This woman was in a nearby park with her granddaughter when the attack happened.
I only remember that when we heard the explosion, we were thrown into the air. Then we continued walking. We saw blown-out windows everywhere. I saw cars on fire. I just can't get a grip of myself. My legs are still shaking.
There was no immediate comment from Russia on the attack. Moscow has denied deliberately targeting civilians, but rocket and drone strikes have hit residential areas in cities and towns across Ukraine.
Russia and Ukraine have accused each other of planning to attack Europe's largest nuclear facility. Meantime, the Zaporizhzhia power station has been in Russian hands since the beginning of the Ukraine invasion. Neither side provided evidence for their claims. The Russian military said that Kyiv was planning to attack using missiles and drones. President Volodymyr Zelensky accused occupying troops of planting explosives around the station. He said Moscow's forces had attacked a power plant before it could do it again. Now, here's more of what the Ukrainian president had to say in his overnight address.
Unfortunately, there was no timely and large-scale response to the terror attack on the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant. And this may inspire the Kremlin to commit new evil. Everyone in the world has a responsibility to stop it, because radiation leaves no one behind.
OK, let's cross straight to our correspondent, Nick Connolly, who is in Kyiv. Hi there, Nick. Now, these are serious accusations being made by the Ukrainian president. Is there concrete evidence to back the claims that he's making?
Well, first off, press can't get there. The IAEA, the international body that looks after nuclear safety, has real problems getting there on a timely basis. So we're working with what we're being told by the Ukrainian and the Russian side. The Ukrainian security services have said they have seen the Russians install what they say looks like explosive devices on the roof of the power plant, which they suggest would be used as a kind of false flag operation to have some damage to the roof that they could then accuse the Ukrainians of having caused with a missile strike. We've similarly heard from the Russian side, various Russian media reporting that they have intelligence that the Ukrainians are supposedly going to send a dirty bomb or some kind of missile with maybe some nuclear waste somehow attached to it to attack the site. But I think certainly there is a real problem that Russia, that has occupied the site since basically the beginning of the war, has not done anything that would allow a kind of demilitarization of that zone. That had been the kind of push from the UN, from the IAEA, and none of that has happened. And we see Russian forces near the plant. Some of them are even based on the plant's site. Some even sleep there. There's been reports of Russian weapons there on the actual plant site, firing at Ukrainian targets across the water on the other side of that Kakhovka reservoir, what's left of it, and kind of basically provoking a Ukrainian response, which so far hasn't happened. The towns on the opposite side of the water there are constantly being attacked from the area of the power station. I think, if you take a step back from this and don't necessarily expect a direct catastrophic nuclear incident, there is speculation from experts, people who've been following this, that this could be more about the kind of propaganda battle, that this is about basically Russia trying to find some reason to accuse Ukraine of being irresponsible, of risking some kind of bigger issue as part of its counteroffensive, in the hope that that will then see Western countries putting pressure on Ukraine to not push forward with its troops in that part of the country as part of its counteroffensive, to get Ukraine to basically stand back and maybe get Western European countries to dial down on their support for Ukraine as part of kind of bigger fears of a catastrophic nuclear event.
OK, a propaganda battle, but of course, given that we're talking about a nuclear power plant, a very, very delicate situation. I know that you recently visited the Zaporizhzhia area. Can you tell us what things are like around there right now?
I mean, Zaporizhzhia is a city of hundreds of thousands of people still left there, and you have daily attacks with ballistic missiles from the Russian side. The towns close to the power plant are being shelled near on, every couple of hours, and people basically living in their cellars, kind of hiding, trying to kind of survive there. As for the situation on the power plant, there is the real danger, apart from all these suggestions of a kind of concerted effort to damage the safety of that plant, of a technical disaster, a kind of catastrophe happening by mistake. We've had repeated events where the power supply that is needed to cool the reactors being destroyed, that power then disappearing, and them having to use emergency diesel generators to cool those reactors. There's speculation there could be damage to the water supply that is also needed to cool the plant. And then there is the other issue of just spent nuclear fuel that is being stored in containers outside on the site of the power plant. If those were hit by mistake, that could be very, very dangerous. A direct hit to the power plant, I think, is less dangerous. Those plants were designed to withstand significant damage, but there are lots of things that could happen just, by function of war happening near that plant by mistake, that could really have very serious consequences for a lot of people living near that plant.
Nick Connolly in Kyiv, thank you so much for that.
All right, let's take a closer look now at the challenges facing Ukraine as it protects its skies. I'm joined now by Anders Puk Nielsen. He is a military analyst at the Royal Danish Defence College. Anders, it's good to have you with us. We are hearing now from the top level of the Ukrainian military more and more that there are shortages of ammunition and weapons across the board. Do we know why that's happening now?
Well, I think in general, it's something we've been talking about a lot across many months. And it's also the situation now that after the counteroffensive, the Ukrainian demand for ammunition is just so much bigger. They need it for two things. They need it both to protect the cities, as your story here is about, but they also need it along the front lines for the actual offensive and winning the war. So there is just a very large consumption of ammunition. And then it's just also a constant fact that, they can always use more.
And can we read anything into that? I mean, the timing of this obviously is not good for the Ukrainian military. We're at the beginning of the counteroffensive, and already they're having to deal with shortages of ammunition. But does that tell us anything about how this counteroffensive is going?
I wouldn't say so necessarily. I will say that the need for ammunition is a constant. It was also one of the things actually in the Pentagon leaks, if we go back 4 or 5 months ago, that was also one of the things mentioned there, that Ukraine would need more ammunition. And, they haven't run out yet. So I think it's just something that constantly they will need deliveries of more and more. But of course, it is important that they have enough to actually go through the summer. The counteroffensive is, of course, going slower than many people were maybe hoping that it would. But it is just the kind of grinding offensive that basically the West has equipped Ukraine to be able to do. So that's what they're doing. And it just requires so much ammunition.
I know that you are a naval officer, a Navy man, but let me ask you if you could to give us your expertise looking towards the skies. And let's talk about what took place in the last 24 hours in Moscow. Moscow claiming that 5 Ukrainian drones were able to penetrate the airspace over the capital. One airport in Moscow was closed temporarily. What does that tell us when the capital city of Moscow, its airspace can be repeatedly, as it sounds like, penetrated by foreign drones?
Well, I think we've seen several examples over the last couple of months that the Russian sort of territory is actually not very well protected, that Russia is focusing very much on the front lines in Ukraine. So there are these weaknesses around Moscow where we see Ukraine being able to send actually drones right into the Russian capital. And of course, we also had this Wagner mutiny, where it turned out that they could also just basically ride up the highway inside Russia, right? So we do see that Russia has these weaknesses behind the front lines, and it is something that Ukraine is leveraging. Clearly, they have an idea of trying to bring the war home to Russia, so that they will also feel that maybe that can increase the pressure on Putin.
I mean, do you see these drone attacks on Moscow as more of a psych ops operation, basically to put fear in the minds of Russians?
Well, I would say fear, but also sort of humiliation of the Russian military, right? The Russian authorities, that they don't control the situation here. Some 16, 17 months into the war that was supposed to last only a couple of weeks, suddenly that the Russian capital is under attack. And it just shows that they don't control the situation. And the longer the war lasts, the worse the worse the situation is getting. So I would more say that than fear. We don't see the Ukrainians targeting Russian civilians in the capital, for example. That would also, in my view, be counterproductive.
Yeah, and we are certainly seeing what looks like that happening more and more in Ukraine. President Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, has said that Ukraine's air defense systems are strained. Are we close to a tipping point here? I mean, right now, we're hearing from the Ukrainian military that they're able to intercept almost all rockets or drones, but not all of them. If they have a shortage, though, of any type of weapon or ammunition, is that going to compromise their air defense systems, in your opinion?
Yes, it would. I mean, and there is that risk that they are not able to keep it up. So over time, maybe we will see more getting through. And of course, already something is getting through. They don't get everything. But I think we also have to acknowledge that it's a dilemma, right? That the Ukrainians want to use this air defense both to protect the cities, but also along the front line. And they need it both places. So there is a trade-off. And whatever they do, they still need more because they're not able to do both.
Anders Puk-Nielsen from the Royal Danish Defence College, we appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you.